All right, we're ready to go. So welcome everybody to the first CEO podcast with Anthony. And we do have some questions and answers queued up for you, Anthony, to get started off. But before we get started, do you want to talk a little bit about why the importance of having you share directly with our members and the purpose of this podcast on having this done on a regular basis?
Yeah, this is our first attempt, so everyone be patient today while we work out the bugs. Am I yelling at you, Lex? How's my volume?
You're not yelling at me. You're good.
All right. Today is the purpose for us to have a conversation, membership and CEO, what's going on. Ask me any questions you want, and to the degree that I can answer, I will. But really kind of set up a free flow of what you need to know in your business, what's going on, what we can help with, and I will answer everything I can today, or worst case scenario, we'll get back to you and try to get you an answer as soon as we can. So with so much going on, so much being very specific to your business, we wanted to give a chance to us to have a conversation each month and highlight some of the things that we're prioritizing for the month and give us a chance to talk. So let's let the experiment begin.
All right. Okay, I'm sharing a screen now with the questions that we have queued up. So Anthony, the first question is, what are you hearing from restaurant members on the topic of compliance, and what specifically urged you to issue this message?
Well, I think what we're hearing from members is we've got tremendous compliance out there with the rules, and people are working really hard to do it. In fact, I had a conversation recently with one of the regulatory agencies, and we've got 70% extreme compliance, and we're doing well. But we also know we have some folks who are not. And we're at a time right now when things are spiking, when we're seeing an increase in cases. And we need the government's trust that our industry can be trusted to do this right. And so we're trying to get the word out there that to keep our guests safe, to keep our employees safe, and to keep our businesses open, please comply. Our fate is in our own hands, and unfortunately, like so many things in life, a few bad apples can harm the whole barrel. So we're working hard to educate. We're working hard to clear up any miscommunications, and we are really going to be strongly encouraging to help us build trust with government by demonstrating strong compliance. And as we need changes, as we hit different phases, we can be trusted to implement those phases.
Now, speaking of trust, building on a foundation of trust is a key theme in your message. Why is that?
This is such a weird time in government. I've been around government affairs since I left our family restaurant business. So for over 20 years. And normally there's a broad group of people you're working with. In this scenario with this virus, it's a very small group of people working with. The governor's office, county health commissioners, or county commissioners, health directors, and that's the world. And if they don't trust us, then it's going to be hard to get some of the things we need. And we need some things to change for this to work. There's no doubt about it. We're well aware of what in the existing rules don't work or need to be tweaked to work better. And so there's no science to this. There's not been 4 other pandemics that we've said, well, this is how you do it. And so when we need tweaks, and we're going to need the trust that we can implement those tweaks and make them work, because there's not a 20-year scientific base to know that for sure. And so I have to go to, and our GA team has been incredible, have to go to the governor's office and each of these county commissioners and say, help us do this so we can get our small businesses up and running again. And they're going to have to then trust that we're going to do that well.
Just to let everybody know, I opened up the chat. So if you have any questions for Anthony that we could answer, that he could answer a little bit later in the podcast, please enter those here, and then we'll sort through those and share them with Anthony to answer. Great. It looks like we already got Lori. Thank you very much. We'll get to that later here. So we got a few more questions here. Talking about the 6-foot distancing challenges, why are they specifically a hot topic?
6-foot distancing is a massive challenge for many restaurants and other businesses, in that there's just not the space to get the tables 6 feet apart. And going to phase 3 at 75% doesn't, I think you skipped a question there, Lex, doesn't help us if physically we can only get 48% of our tables or chairs in with 6-foot distancing. And so we were able to get barriers, one of the first states to do so. But even with barriers, I think we need some further work on that. I did go down to Vancouver and work with several operators. Thank you so much to those operators. And we had measuring tapes. We spent the better part of a day working with the health department there and different businesses, traveling around from a fine dining place to a bar, to a pizza place, to a Mexican restaurant, trying to say, okay, what's going to work to tweak the 6-foot distancing to make it work? And we have some ideas, but we're only going to be able to get those ideas in the next undoing of freezes, and we need the spike to go down. It's a big part of what we're working on. So we understand that going to phase 3 for many businesses does us no good if we can't tweak the 6-foot distances, and it's a big deal. We are working on it. We do have some ideas. Similar to the 5-person limit, I can't think of a Pentagon-built table in our businesses. And the reality is, it really should be 6. And getting us to phase 3 gets us to 10. And so that's another change we're also trying to work on. So our physical spaces can actually work for our guests and work to get the biggest amount of capacity we can in those short 2-hour dining windows at lunch and dinner.
Actually, following up on the on that 5-person limit, got a question from Diane Simmons. Diane Sims, the 5-person limit for a party size is very difficult. That most parties are 4 to 6. How can we get the government to change this rule to 6 instead of 5?
You know, our team, well, right now, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. Maybe I can do that right now. Right now, everything's frozen. With the spike going on, I don't think we're going to get any changes for the next 2 weeks. And I think the governor was quite clear on it on his press conference yesterday, which was the 6th, I believe. We're going to try to stick to this freeze and see if we can get compliance, see if we can get mask wearing, and see if we can get these cases to drop again. But that being said, we are working on a series of tweaks and changes to phases 2 and phase 3 that can work better for the industry. And moving the phase 2 limit from 5 to 6 is one of those conversations we're having. And so we are attempting that conversation. For many families, it just is a more workable number. And for table size and the way our businesses are set up, so it's a more workable number. But they are on hold for the next couple of weeks while we focus on getting compliance and getting the case numbers to drop.
Okay. I had a question here from Lori Mellon. I heard a spike of cases caused by employees at a restaurant in Oregon. Do you know the details of how that happened? Were they not wearing masks? Does anyone know what happened?
I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with the Oregon case, but we've had some cases here in Washington. Sorry, I threw my glasses on so I could see everyone's questions. I'm not familiar with that case, but I am familiar with some cases in Washington. And it's really an issue of compliance. One of them has to do with employees and not a real diligence by doing screening when employees come in. So there was a cook not checking in, and then when he did mention after a little bit that he wasn't feeling well, the manager was not diligent and immediately sending him home. And that cook exposed servers who weren't diligent about wearing masks, and that exposed guests. And that's what happened in one of the scenarios. In another one of the scenarios, it was more of a bar situation where a guest was going from bar to bar with the virus, and there was a lot of mingling, walking around, and he exposed several people in several different locations and over 2 evenings. So what these cases have taught us so far is if we follow the stuff that's being laid out, we probably would have been okay. And if we're adamant about checking in and we're adamant about you're feeling not well, stay home and disclose where you're at, and whether it's temperatures or check-ins, do that. And we're really diligent about mask wearing and staying seated, and then mask wearing when you're not at the table. We're going to be able to prevent some of the outbreaks so far. Sorry, Lori, I'm not familiar with the case in Oregon, but I will look into it and see if we can learn anything from that. Lex, I think we had another question on our own sheets on social media.
Yeah, let me go ahead and put that up. How does social media help or hinder Washington hospitality businesses at this time?
What's really interesting to me is we currently have 3 government agencies enforcing these rules. L&I is probably supposed to be the lead and the bigger dog, but they have the least amount of staff and capacity to do it. So they're getting help from the Liquor Control Board and the Health Department, but the Health Department is overloaded right now, being the Department of Health, and trying to comply with the things of the virus itself. And so the Liquor Control Board is probably what we've seen to date being the most active. All that being said, it's social media. With everyone being strapped and everyone being on tight time and no one really wanting to get exposure by being out there themselves, social media has been the biggest enforcer of these rules. And I know from my own phone and my own network of professionals and people I went to school with, I probably get 6 or 8 pictures a day about non-compliance. And people are posting things everywhere. And I can't tell you how much I've seen someone saying, hey, did you see this bartender not wearing a mask at this place? And then they put it on social media. And then all the posts that then follow that, and they're not kind, and they're direct, and they spread, and they use your name, and they attack your brand. But I also say that they've been getting the most effectiveness. And so while I hate that any business's brand is hurt that way and our industry is portrayed that way, it does turn people around rather quickly. And social media has kind of been a love-hate thing in that it's helped us get compliance. People are brutal when they feel that you're putting their families or their community's health at risk by not following the rules. The downside of social media is they don't really know the rules. And so we're seeing complaints of, I sat next to another group of people at their table and they weren't wearing masks. Well, once you're seated, you're not required to wear a mask. And so the downside on social media is they don't always know what to enforce or what to be brutal upon. So what I would say to operators who are worried about enforcement is do the right thing and know that social media is going to be much, much more direct and painful at this point than either of any of the 3 agencies. Not that a $10,000 fine isn't harmful, and not that losing your liquor license wouldn't cripple many businesses. And I do think that's probably the next step. I do think you're going to see the Liquor Control Board probably move on the license front with a lot of people who are getting multiple warnings and complaints. But your long-term brand, I think, is right now what's putting most people at risk.
Okay, next question. What is the one thing you hope Washington hospitality businesses remember at this time?
Well, I'm going to come back to trust, and I'm a huge believer that trust makes systems flow. We don't need regulations. We don't need heavy things if we can be trusted. But trust is also earned. We need to get everybody to phase 3. We have to. We can't roll back. Roll back will be very, very painful. And then we need in phase 3 to get a couple of changes made to make this work for us. These are only going to happen if the few people who have the power to make these decisions say, yep, everything we've seen from you, you've worked very, very hard at compliance. You worked very, very hard to be safe. We're moving forward. And there's been steps along the way where they've mentioned that. We've seen strong compliance among restaurants. We've seen strong compliance among hotels. We're comfortable moving forward, or we're comfortable fighting for you behind closed doors. We can't lose that. Early on in this process, we lost it when there was early warnings on social distancing and early warnings from that. Some of the bar scenes around the state stayed packed before we shut down. A lot of those bars were jammed full before the mandates kicked in, and it took us a couple of weeks to say the industry can come back from this. The industry can earn trust from this, and I think we've done that. But now we need to keep building. And beyond that, we're gonna have to make changes, and the public's gonna have to trust that the changes we've made are in their best interest, and in best interest of the long term of the industry. Our model was changing before this, and now it's changing radically. People are gonna have to understand these are being done for a reason, so we still have our great small Main Street businesses moving forward.
We got a question a while back from Amy in the Q&A section.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a restaurant with 5 tables that seat 5 and a banquet of 25 where guests come in and are immediately seated 5 tables of 5? Make sense?
It does. And I think this is a little bit rhetorical of why we can't have more of our group guest seating. And I think Amy, if you've seen the release on the guidance on the weddings and the funerals and some of the other things that are now allowed, we're also working on trying to make changes earlier in phase 3 to allow for more things. But again, in the short term, we're frozen. I would say, being the messenger but not the believer, I would say if I'm talking to other people, typically a banquet has a lot of interaction. People are getting up, going from table to table and talking and intermingling is kind of the point of a banquet. Oftentimes you're not just seated, there's also a lot of socialization. And a lot of those moments, I think, again, being the messenger, not the believer, what I'm going to hear from the people making the decisions is, how do we keep people wearing masks in those social situations? That when they see someone they know and they get up across the room, that they remember to take their mask with them, wear the mask, go talk to the person at the other table and come back. Also at banquets, they would say you're less likely to be seating with people you know and more likely to be seating with a mix of people coming from a mix of households. And so those are the conversations that we would be having.
Okay. We've got a question from Perry. What do you see regarding supply chain and the cost of goods for the rest of the way in 2020?
I'm worried. Things change so fast. I think it's funny. At one point, we got assurances from many of the food suppliers we're in good shape, and then we got warnings, and then we were like, oh, maybe we'll be okay. So it's gone back and forth. A lot of like what we've experienced with the virus itself. But what's really kept the I lost my train of thought here. Virus going is the food processors. The food processing plants in Washington have been our biggest struggle as a state, and all as being one community, from getting the virus under control. And so that's why you've seen Yakima, Benton, Franklin, for a while, Chelan, Douglas, later in the seasons, Grant and some other counties just have some incredible spikes for their communities in the number of cases over 2 weeks per 100,000. And that impact on that specific industry, I am worried about how that impacts the supply chain moving forward, and how that transitions. Now, if they get through it and they can find the way, and American innovation and human spirit are incredible things. If they find the solutions to those real problems, I think in the long run it'll correct itself and we'll get back on track. But I am a little worried right now. I'm not gonna lie about that one.
Okay, got a question from Bill here. Are we doing anything to combat the negative PR from other states that open too early and less restrictive than Washington regulations, especially with spikes in Texas, Florida, California?
Yeah, I would tell you, it is funny how pendulums swing. 3 weeks ago, Washington was getting heavily criticized, and I was getting heavily criticized about why are other states opening up and when we're not. And And good, bad, and different. The governor stuck with we don't want to do this twice. We only want to reopen once, and we're going to try to go a little slower. As luck had it, that's panned out well for Washington. And even though we're spiking at a lot smaller rate than Arizona was having 4,000 to 6,000 cases a day. I'm not discrediting our spike right now, folks. We had 1,000 new cases over on Monday or Tuesday. That was our biggest single day spike we've had through this whole thing. So we are spiking, but not spiking like the other areas have. We have built a PR network in times of crisis. I love how we came together. So the association reached out to chambers and DMOs across the state and built what we're calling the PR councils, or a strong PR network for the industry. So we're working with the PR professionals in 10 regions around the state. Each of those regions has 5 or 6 PR professionals. And each week we're talking about our industry messaging. Right now, our industry messaging is really not as much why we're different, but mask up. We do not want to roll backwards. I would say right now, we're at risk of being the only West Coast state not to roll backwards. And that's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on our elected officials to stay where we are. That's why I think this 2-week freeze is a blessing. And honestly, if cases spike really hard tomorrow, there could be a county that rolls backwards. That being said, we're focusing on masking up. And so our messaging in the next 2 weeks is going to be, how can we get our members to talk into their communities and say, mask up for the sake of my business? How can we produce little signs that you say, save my dream, wear a mask? How could we get masks for little signs for your servers, your cooks, your counter people, other folks to say, save my job, wear a mask, save my paycheck, wear a mask. We need to move this away from the politicians, because I think to some degree masks have become political. And we need to move this to, it's our community, it's our jobs, it's our economy, and it's a mask. Come on, we can do this. And so we'll be focusing there, but to Bill's original question, we look at the best things we need to do for the industry in 2-week windows. We craft new messages, and hopefully we get those things out there. I got to say, I'm really happy with the number of placements we've been getting, and I think we're making progress on how to really be a social media force. Not quite there yet, tweaks and things, but we've got a good 50 people working together on behalf of the industry throughout the state. I can't thank the DMOs and the chambers enough for being willing to rally around hospitalities like they have.
Okay, got a question here. Not quite sure. You could probably help decipher. What if masks were required when standing, not sitting, like in restaurants?
It's interesting in that's part of what the governor did announce last week, but I think it's gotten the least amount of press. It's his ban on mingling, which, okay, if you played, I don't know, Family Feud on 10 things you never thought you'd see 2 years ago, I think a ban on mingling would be way up there. But what the governor is asking is that people stay seated, and that if you're running a bar or if you are running a place where you're more likely to have people move around, ask them to stay seated or wear their mask. And so that is part of what the governor announced. It hasn't gotten a lot of press yet. I think the mask itself conversation has gotten the most attention, but we probably will as an association be talking about that more and saying, please stay seated. Yes, we do have places in phase 3 and the bar feels normal, but it's not. And we need to have you stay seated in your area. So that would be also true of some of the other guidelines that are out there.
Great. We got that thing from Perry on regarding the Restaurant Act of 2020 proposed by Congressman Earl Blumenauer of Oregon. Do you think it'll pass, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there are several ideas out there. I will say I'm really heartened by the fact that our community has recognized that hospitality has been the most impacted industry. I sat on the governor's economic recovery task force. I sit on the governor's economic recovery task force with people from labor and social services and small and large businesses. You know, when we looked at all the numbers, and it became very clear that the industry most need of relief right now is ours. And I think the community is rallying behind that. And we're seeing that in proposals from legislators across congressional people across the country. I think there's going to be one bill. So I think elements of the restaurant fund, which is the elements of the Restaurant Act, elements of a different version of PPP specifically targeted at hospitality or impacted industries. I think all those conversations are going to occur, but I don't think it's going to be a series of bills. I think it's going to be combined into one that has the most votes and move forward. And we'll be working with the National Restaurant Association and the American Hotel and Lodging Association and our congressional delegation all the way through. If you see in your own local community that we are having what we're calling town halls, please join. We're trying to get legislators and congressional folks to join those different calls. And part of that is talking about how these things can really help. So I appreciate Congressman Blumenauer's proposal, and I think it helps generate the conversation that ultimately be the final bill.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something there that maybe if you could go a little bit more into. The association is going to be launching a series of town halls regionally across the state, virtual town halls via Zoom webinars. And Anthony, do you want to talk a little bit about why we're doing that and some of the things that inspired you to do that throughout for a membership for the next couple of months here?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think one of the outcries for help that our members have been saying is, what's everybody doing? I need to share ideas. How are you managing guest registration? How are you managing angry customers? How are you managing protests? I mean, we live in this time of chaos. I feel like that scene in Ghostbusters when Bill Murray walks in and screams about cats and dogs living together, and somehow that's normal. It just feels like the world we're in right now. And so what we're trying to do is create town halls that you can come together as a community and say, hey, what's everybody doing? And so we'll have a topic or two that will lead it off. We'll talk to a couple of your legislators, but we're mostly open for give you the venue to talk together and say, what are people seeing on Wednesday nights? What have you done with this? How do you handle the angry guests? And what we are finding is this is regional. Masks is very, very political and in elements of Eastern Washington. It's not political in elements of Western Washington, specifically King County, as much. It's more medical and my freedom of choice and those things. And so the way you handle those situations can be different. And so we're hoping that we can learn from each other. All ideas are good, and even the ideas that weren't great, if we can share them with each other and get better, we're hoping that happens through these town halls. We'll be experimenting with them in July and August. I believe our first one, Lex, is it Pierce County?
I believe so, yes.
In another week, so we'll be getting notices out about that. And we'll be having them by region across the state, giving you a chance to talk to each other.
Great. Let's see, I don't think I've got any other.
One question I would ask, and again, this is really hopefully for you to ask any questions you want, any hanging chads, any irritation, the chance to yell at me, and I think that sometimes that's healthy so we can hear the concerns out there. But I think one thing I would ask is this freeze going to go beyond 2 weeks? And I will tell you, in many communities, yes. We are seeing communities before this spike that I'm going to talk about a magic number, and that magic number is the number of new cases per 100,000 over the past 14 days. And we need that number to be less than 25 to move forward from phase to phase. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had communities that were at 10 that are now at 65, 75. They jumped really, really fast over 2 weeks. But the way that they climbed, it's going to take 2 weeks for those numbers to drop again to allow for that phasing to happen. So For me, if I were running my own business, I can't tell you how to run yours. We're all different. A sandwich shop is different than a steakhouse, which is different than like the pizza places used to run, Lex. They all have different models, even though they're all restaurants. But if it were my restaurant, I would be prepared to say through August, through July, this is what I've got, and how can I make this work the best? And the association will fight like hell to move the bar forward when the moment is right next.
I actually got an email question from
Yeah.
Dave Hook. I'm going to paraphrase because it's a long one. So he has an employee whose boyfriend works in a restaurant or works in a place that a coworker tested positive for COVID. And he is worried about his employee because they live in the same home. And even though he hasn't been exposed, he asked his local health clinic, and they told him that as long as she's wearing her mask, there should be no problem. Dave's question is this third-party exposure something I should be reacting to other than continuing our temperature checks and closely watching for symptoms?
Dave, it's great to hear from you. Dave's, by the way, if you didn't know, one of our Hall of Fame members, founder of Senior Froggies there in Spokane, and I'm huge fans of his and Lisa's. So Dave, good to hear from you. That being said, I would talk to my health department right away. I'm a believer in over communicating with my health department. You are almost definitely going to have an employee who gets exposed to COVID over the summer. And so I think what you want is, I'm going to come back to trust, the trust of the health department, that the second you have an issue, they know that you'll call them. And that allows that inspection that they do that, well, if there was an issue, Dave would call me. If there was an issue, this would happen. So to me, I am a huge believer in over communication. And right now, I would have my health inspector's contact number on speed dial and say, hey, this happened. What do you want me to do? That way, that will get you trust in the way they talk about you moving forward. That being said, I want to make sure I heard Dave's question accurately. He has an employee who works in another restaurant, and that employee has contracted COVID. Lex?
No, he has her employee, and then she lives in a house with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend worked at a place her boyfriend works in a place, and he has a coworker who tested positive for COVID. He didn't test positive for COVID, but there's that whole third-party exposure thing that Dave's reasonably concerned about.
Yeah.
And he did approach his health clinic, but it sounds like he needs to also approach his health department as well.
Again, I'm a believer in over communication right now with the health department. They have the ability to grant a lot of different things, and again, it comes back to trust. And I think this is a time we need to build trust in the community. That being said, if you're doing strictly speaking by the rules, what I would do is you don't need to isolate your employee or quarantine your employee at this point from the details that I understand. But I probably would sit down with the employee and say, hey, we want to protect all your other coworkers. We want to protect the business to stay open. And so if anyone develops any of the symptoms, if anyone develops any of these things, stay home immediately and call me, and we'll figure out how to deal with this. So I would probably have that direct conversation and make sure that we're giving that employee lots of room to feel comfortable in making that call.
Okay, great. We just got a question from Lance. Is there a correlation between the number of tests conducted and cases reported? I assume number of tests have increased.
Lance, it's good to hear from you. My family was in your restaurant there over in North Tacoma not that long ago, and I got to tell you, your employees were amazing. The distancing was great. The signage was great. The communication and hospitality was fantastic. So kudos to your employees, Lance. That being said, it's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations of this. What's concerning, I'm going to cough because I'm talking, not because you need to run 6 feet away from your computer screen. Give me just 1 second to have a glass of water. Yes, there is a correlation between the increased number of cases and increased testing. That's not what is concerning the governor's office and what is concerning the reason we went into a freeze for 2 weeks. It's the testing positive rate is up. That's a concern. Hospitality or hospital rates are increasing, and those infected are shifting to a different population that maybe hasn't been taking as many precautions. So I think it's the combination of all those things that's causing a concern. I think if hospitalizations were staying flat in all our communities across the area, if the spike wasn't as dramatic, the spike, even when you take in for the number of additional cases, is still at a higher level because the testing positive rate is higher. And I think those are things the governor's office is keeping track of. I'm going to get good at talking about that eventually, but we've had several conversations with different folks to feel comfortable. This is not a overreaction to over-testing. There's more here, and I think you can criticize other things, but I think this is a good measured step to try to keep us from trying to roll backwards.
Right. Let's see, I don't have any other questions in the queue here. Anthony, any other, and our design is for these podcasts to go anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, and if necessary, an hour, but kind of keep it in that time frame. Until we get any more questions, Anthony, any thoughts that you'd like to share with our members in regards to their business, things coming down the pipe from the government, state and local, or federal?
You know, the best thing that you can do for us is comply and help your neighbor comply. We have got a lot to ask for from the government, from relief to tweaks in the way the phases are laid out, to understanding about how phases move forward. And that's from the health department to the liquor control board, all up and down the chain. And that starts with trust. And social media is an incredible thing. I thought it was really interesting. I'm watching all the governor's press conferences because it dramatically affects our world. And one of the reporter asked him about the beaches in Ocean Shores and why didn't he close the beaches in Ocean Shores? And his answer was, well, based on all the social media pictures we saw of the coast, we're not having the same problem as Florida and California and Texas on our beaches. Think about that. Based on the social media pictures that we've seen, that means when your server, your late night bartender gets a little tired and drops her mask down over her nose and on her chin, and someone takes a picture of it, it's being seen. When you have a bunch of people show up at one time and crowd your lobby, it's being taken a picture of. And so we need to get those pictures down. We need to get the positive pictures up. So people can help us by taking the positive pictures of when you do something fun. I was down in Vancouver, Beaches Restaurant. They've got little beach balls on the ground. And you stand inside the beach ball while you're waiting for your table. I thought that was a really creative idea. I love the QR codes. If you haven't seen the QR codes, where you scan the QR code and the first question is, would you like to register that you've been here today in case we have an outbreak? That takes that right off the table. It makes it easy. You don't have to manage anything. I've seen just a ton of creativity. There was a diner in South Sound area that put up, in the booths that were empty, put up celebrity cutouts. And then each table that wasn't being used had a theme. I think there was an Audrey Hepburn theme one where it had champagne glasses and other things at the table. Take pictures of those things, get them out there, let the public see, wow, the industry is being crazy in their compliance, and therefore we can trust them to do more. And if you see your neighbor or someone that you work with violating it, no, we're putting all of ourselves at risk. And we're going to be talking about policing and more active policing moving forward in the week to come, so we can move ourselves forward. I see a couple more questions to come in.
Yeah, the first one.
we are working on buffets. So what's our best advice? Sorry, Lex, I should let you ask me.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
We're going to learn how to do this podcast, everyone. If you can't tell, this is on the fly. We are working on ways to get buffets open before phase 4, and what that might look like. Again, everything's been put on freeze for the moment, and so hopefully more is coming. But I wouldn't make any plans until we see those numbers get back down again. But we are working on some of those rules. The comm department said we just received buffet guidance today. That's great. So thanks, Jillian, for letting me know that. Probably happened while we were on this call. So we'll be getting that out shortly. Watch your emails. If you're not getting the emails, well, look at Jillian go. She put up the guideline for where that is. That's good. Thank you, Jillian. What's the next question, Lex?
This is from Scott Perry. Who is the person that decided 5 guests is the magic number? And then any way to petition the governor to increase the number to 8 or 10. So what was the reasoning and thinking behind choosing the number 5, basically?
It was less than 6. I think what was the reasoning between 5? We were actually hoping for 6 and working with the governor's office. I think they were very, very nervous about opening and wanted to keep the numbers small. They didn't want it to be where multiple parties were coming together. And so they went with 5, as much as that's not the number we would have selected. We are working to move it in phase 2 to 6, but I don't think phase 2 is going much higher. I think the more important thing is Scott, let's get you to phase 3. Phase 3 allows 10. And I think that's where we need to get to. And the fastest thing we can do to get there is encourage mask wearing, encourage distancing. Let's get those numbers back down. And again, I'm not trying to preach to you, Scott. I've known you a long time. Phase 3 is what we got to get to you, and then that will get you past the 6 number. And then when we unfreeze, hopefully we can continue a good relationship with the governor's office and move that number from 5 to 6 in phase 2. But no promises at this point, and we don't really know how long this freeze is going to go. And even if the freeze does end in 2 weeks, you're not going to move forward to the next phase until your number gets under 25. And right now, King and Snohomish are quite a bit above that. So I would say the rest of this month.
Great. All right, we have no questions in the queue. So Anthony, any final?
We got one last question, which I think is a great one to end on. So let's make this our last question. If anybody has any other questions, Lex, let's have one of your team members post where they can send them to, and we're going to try to get them answered.
Yeah.
Perry, what's my crystal ball on our industry when the dust settles, fallout of restaurants, and what will likely be permanent? One, I'm going to give you a guess, but I predicted the last 4 Apple Cups wrong, so tells you how much I know. Yes, Lex, I see your UW shirt there. Things are changing fast. So my guess is in this moment. But if the second wave doesn't hit, if the virus is in fact, you get it one time and you're done, but we don't know that yet, there's so many things yet to fall out. So I'm going to base my thing on what I think I know in the moment, but I'm owning it's my best guess and it could change tomorrow. Right now, I think the best we can hope for is to move everyone to phase 3 at some point this summer. I think I'm really worried about Franklin, Douglas, and Yakima about their ability to get there by the end of the summer. But I'm hopeful that if we can control the spike and if we get mask wearing, we know that mask wearing works. We know that barriers work. We know that 6 feet distancing works. As much as they're annoying, they work. Then I'm hopeful we can get everyone to phase 3. That being said, my crystal ball says we're not going to move to phase 4 until March. And no one's told me that. No, that's not anything that I can guarantee. But people are expecting a second wave. When kids come back to school, there's going to be an increase in cases. And so I would say I would plan on what would my business, if it were my business, I would plan on what would it look like in phase 3 through March, and how can I make that work? And then we'll learn once, if there's a second wave, how bad the second wave is. What does the second wave do to hospitalizations? And we'll know more about it spreading from if people can get it a second or third time, or do we build antibodies and we're able to fight it? What's going to be permanent? You know what's interesting? I'm talking to operators who are now kind of past the angry and panic stage and in this really strategic stage. And some of them are really looking at, wow, these QR codes are interesting. Wow, I can run differently. Wow, maybe my employee mix can be different. How did we ever get to the point where we thought we had to be open on Mondays and Tuesdays when we were only doing 10% of, 5% business on those days? What happens if we close on those days and make better use on those times? And people are asking some questions that I think are going to have a long-term permanent adjustment. I think the forcing of people to use technology as an alternative to having to bring people in and exposing them is going to continue. I also think for years, a lot of full service people I feel like I'm talking a lot about restaurants. Lodging folks, I'll get to some of your stuff as well, thought that they couldn't do to go. And I think some of them, specifically in neighborhoods, have really found delivery as an option they can do. And after about 2-3 weeks of playing with how to make it work, found a way to make it work, even if in the first 2 weeks it didn't. And I think guests are getting more and more comfortable with the idea of what they get from those restaurants moving forward. So I think delivery as a permanent part of some full service operations is probably a hold. Technology adjustments is probably a hold. And I think we're going to see some permanent labor adjustments because of things we learned by force during this. On the lodging side, similarly, I think we're looking at the automatic check-ins. Do we have to clean between every night in a room? What does that look like? I think a lot of the changes we're making by force, I'm hearing people talk about, well, why wouldn't this work afterwards if I'm saving X amount and if guests aren't overly concerned about it? It goes back to those days where we used to pile vegetables on our plates. Remember those days in the early 80s? And then we'd watch the garbage cans and half those things would get thrown away. And it took us, 8 years to figure out, well, people are throwing away, why do we keep giving it to them? I think as we've taken away services, we'll probably only add them as demand is really, really there to add them back. And that will help us reduce costs. On the lodging side, we are looking at what we originally called Rediscover Washington. Now I think we're going to be calling it Explore Washington, and how we get people to visit Washington and take their vacations here. I think the state-to-state travel is down for a couple of years, and I think our best hope is to get people to travel within our state. And there's a ton of things to see in our state. There's so many great things. I mean, you can take 5 years worth of vacations here in Washington and see different things. And how do we get that message out to people in Washington to keep our hotels full, to keep our restaurants and bars and activities that are close to those hotels full once we get out of this? I think the year of the road trip is probably going to be the 2-year of the road trip, biennium of the road trip, and those things are going to be here for a while. And then hopefully they stick. Maybe people's permanent vacation is no longer Disneyland and Hawaii, but maybe becomes Walla Walla and Long Beach and Chelan, and go from there.
Right. Anthony, I only have one question. I know that you said those would be the last question, but it seems like it's kind of relevant to that phase 4 question. What do you anticipate in fall and winter when we can't seat people outdoors?
Well, hi, Liz. It's good to hear from you. I really want to get people to phase 3. And so while we're working with a lot of communities and we'll be working with the governor's office on a standardized way to seat outdoors, I think we need to get to phase 3, and we need the changes in phase 3 to make phase 3 work, including a different way to look at 6-foot distancing, which we have ideas on and we hope to be working with the governor's office on. My sense is if we can actually get people to 75%, and then work on these other things that we're doing. We can get a lot of the folks through to spring and see where we're at. That's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of trust by the government of us, which means we are really going to have to get our industry to be a shining star about complying and taking safety seriously. So I don't mean to be preachy on that, but really our fate is now in our own hands and is going to be proven out in social media over the next month.
Great.
Everyone, I can't tell you what an honor it is to serve you and work on you. And I can tell you that the staff that we have has been working 50, 60-hour weeks since this thing began, trying to move forward. And thank you to the staff to do everything you can. For a lot of the relief you've seen, a lot of the communications we've seen, this is an amazing team who's been working really hard in tremendously difficult times for you. And we understand it, and we love you, very passionate about you. Amy, again, we're just, we agree, that's why we have an alternative plan. We are going to work hard on that and see if we can't get something different. So wish us luck, and we promise to work our butts off to try to make phase 3 work for more people.
All right. I think that's it. These we plan on doing these monthly, right, Anthony, to begin with, and we'll see how it goes from there. All right. Okay, everybody.
Is there going to be a survey at the end of this? People can let us know what they thought.
Yeah, I have a poll that I can do. We could send out an email to the attendees and have their feedback. So if you could fill those out.
It would be a great use of your time. So let us know what we did right. Let us know what we did wrong. And good luck to everyone out there. I hope July goes well. Be safe and help us get compliance